Hi, I'm Madison McAllister, and I will be presenting on women's mental health in America. Starting off the 19th century's view of women's minds, women's emotions were seen as signs of weakness or illness. They were typically diagnosed with hysteria, which is exaggeratedly or inappropriately emotional behavior, melancholia, a severe form of depression, and nervous exhaustion, which is a state of extreme mental and physical fatigue caused by prolonged stress or emotional overload. Doctors tied women's health to reproduction and domesticity. Female independence meant that there was a medical problem that needed to be treated. The origin of the rest cure, or a little bit more background on the rest cure that we talked about during the Yellow Wallpaper. The rest cure was created by Dr. Silas Weir Mitchell in the 1870s. Treatment consisted of total bed rest, isolation, no writing or creativity. This aimed to calm overstimulated female nerves and often caused more depression and psychological stress. In the Yellow Wallpaper, Dr. Mitchell told the narrator who underwent the rest cure during a spout of postpartum depression to live as domestic a life as possible and never to touch pen, brush, or pencil again. A little bit more on the Yellow Wallpaper by Gilman, which came out in 1892. The narrator, this is Gilman here. Narrator undergoes the rest cure under her husband John, a physician, confined to a nursery with yellow wallpaper, forbidden to write or think freely. Her mental decline reflects both psychological trauma and social oppression. And then a quote that I pulled from that book. I sometimes fancy that in my condition, if I had less opposition and more society and stimulus, but John says the very worst thing I can do is to think about my condition. In this book, Gilman could be the narrator, but we don't know who the narrator is. So that is, you could think about that, I guess. A little bit more, I kind of just find postpartum depression pretty interesting because there's not a lot of research done on it. I tried to look up as much possible about it, even on the database that we have through our library, and there's really not a lot of research done on postpartum depression, which is crazy to me. So in the 19th century, women showing signs of postpartum depression were often labeled as hysterical or nervously exhausted, which these terms were just thrown around to any woman who had any problem. Medicine blamed childbirth for unbalancing the female mind, reinforcing the idea that women were emotionally fragile. Rather than being supported, women were isolated, sedated, or prescribed the rest cure. More research has been done on the commonness of postpartum depression and how brutal the changes are to a woman's body after childbirth. Research states that with approximately around 4 million births each year in the United States, an estimated 760,000 women annually suffer from clinically significant postpartum depressive illness, which is honestly, not an insane statistic, but it's a pretty big statistic for these people. My mother, she recently had my little baby brother, and she has dealt with anxiety her whole life, and I definitely saw a mental shift in her after she had my brother. Not a good one either. But I saw this picture and I thought it was pretty interesting. This is like a before and after. I feel like you could see a little bit of difference in the after. It's a little bit more swollen here and here, but I'm not like insanely smart and can explain what all these parts of the brain are. I wish I was, but I just thought that, you could look at these and tell there's a drastic difference between both of them, which is very important to the topic because it was treated as something that you can just lay in bed all day and get rid of. The second source that I decided to talk about is Chopin's The Awakening. Edna Poirier Pontellier, her discontent was seen as mental instability. Her awakening is spiritual and emotional, not pathological. Society reads her emotions as madness because she rejects her role. Chopin's message is that emotional honesty does not equal mental illness. And this here is Chopin. She's really pretty. And then a quote that I pulled from The Awakening that I thought was really pretty. The voice of the sea is seductive, never ceasing, whispering, clamoring, murmuring, inviting the soul to wander for a spell in abysses of solitude, to lose itself in mazes of inward contemplation. So, background of the science of female inferiority. Specifically, to start off with the brain embodiments. 19th century doctors claimed women's smaller brains proved they were less intelligent and more emotional. These claims were taught in medical schools and cited in scientific journals as evidence that women should avoid politics, study, or professional work. The nervous system argument. Physicians like George M. Beard in the 1870s said that women had weaker nerves, which made them prone to exhaustion, hysteria, and melancholy. Doctors warned that education or ambition could overstrain the female's nervous system. Treatments were isolation, sedation, rest cure, or later we get into psychosurgery for women labeled emotionally unstable. From nerves to neurosurgery. In 1930s to 1950s, psychiatry shifted from rest cures to brain surgery, botched brain surgery at that, popularized in the 1940s to 50s as a rest cure for anxiety, depression, or disobedience, especially in women. In practice, lobotomies often silenced or subdued patients rather than healed them. Nearly 60% of lobotomy patients were women, despite men being diagnosed with mental illness at similar rates. Seen as a medical way to calm difficult women, continuing a long tradition of controlling female behavior through treatment. So, lobotomies, this is something that I could probably do an entire presentation on. It was just insanely invasive and dehumanizing, and it was an authority problem that should have never happened. But I did paste a video in here which I thought was really interesting. It is, I think, a school, and they have a skull that has went through a lobotomy, and you could see where they went into the skull, and he talks more about the background of lobotomies and, more about them. I really could write an entire presentation about this, and I thought about it. But basically they go under your eyelid and they go into your brain, and they get this front part of your brain, they kind of just wiggle it around in there and opens it up. But it basically gets rid of your entire personality. And there's also a lot, I'm gonna paste some more videos because I really watched a lot of stuff about lobotomies, but there's also not a lot of I tried to find, because I kind of like to see surgeries be done. So I wanted to see a lobotomy procedure be done, but they didn't have any. So, but I did see a video about the before and after of people getting lobotomies, and they are very different personality wise and kind of also physically. So I'll paste some of that as well. But yeah, before, after, this is kind of an example of the procedure. I was just talking too much about that. The cause of scientific thinking. When bias became treatment, scientific sexism justified invasive cures that silence women. Rest cures, confinement, electrotherapy, hyperectomies. By mid-20th century, up to 60% of lobotomy patients were women. That statistic I had to repeat twice because that's just an insane statistic in itself. Doctors claim these procedures calmed nervous women. In reality, they erased emotion, creativity, and any type of resistance. This here is electrotherapy, which I thought was crazy also. These treatments are really just crazy. It would be like small shocks all over the body. Yeah, I don't know. It's crazy. I need to stop saying that. I'm sorry, Professor Richard. The legacy of medical misunderstanding. Women's symptoms are still often dismissed or misdiagnosed in modern healthcare. Studies show women wait longer for pain treatment and are more likely to have symptoms labeled psychological rather than physical. Women are twice as likely to be prescribed antidepressants, sometimes for normal emotional distress. During 2015 to 2018, 13.2% of adults aged 18 and over used antidepressant medications in the past 30 days. Use was higher among women, 17.7%, than men, which is 18.4%. Bias lingers. Emotion in women is still seen as instability, not expression. We discussed a little bit more about this in class. I remember that you said that you had a female friend who had to get her ex-husband to sign off on some procedure that she had to have done. And that is just an example of how this bias lives on today and how, especially in the South, these things are not looked over upon. They're very prominent, I feel. Even today, women are more likely to be dismissed as anxious or emotional instead of being taken seriously. The same bias that called women hysterical or prescribed lobotomies has just evolved into new forms. Gilman and Chopin were ahead of their time. They showed that true healing begins when women are believed. And that's it. I'm going to put a little bit more of those videos in there, and I hope you liked it.